And with some of this climate stuff, I am absolutely convinced that there is a cult-like, religious-like element to a lot of the ideology. I'm not saying everyone who cares about the planet is, an ideologue and is crazy, but in every religion, for every sin, there must be atonement. There must be some kind of punishment and apology. And I think to a lot of these people, the idea of poor people freezing to death or the countries becoming poor, they don't care about it because they see that as a price for our sins. And so I think part of it is these people fundamentally believe that we are bad and we must be punished. And if we are made poorer by the decisions that they are taking, that's not only not a bad thing, actually, that is how we atone for our many crimes. I think that's a big part of it.
My name's Max Gagliardi, and this is Always Be Building. If you're watching this video, take a moment, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, or you can follow me on your favorite podcast app. Hope you enjoy the show. Konstantin, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Max. I appreciate it.
I guess we can start with the speech, just an incredible viral moment and something that, I shared and went crazy on Twitter and TikTok and the other platforms. I know my reaction to it and why I thought it was so great. I mean, I work in the energy industry, try to translate a lot of these issues that you brought up in that speech to other people, but just from your perspective, just your reaction to it and why you think it resonated so much.
I think it resonated so much because it's an argument people haven't heard articulated much. The climate doomsday narrative is everywhere and it's unchallenged. And I think it's quite deliberately unchallengeable because, if you put a child at the front of it, then suddenly, any disagreement becomes an attack. And I'm not a climate scientist or any scientist, so I'm not making any comment about, climate changes are happening or not, but it doesn't make sense to me that the solution to that problem would be to try and focus on the things that don't matter. And I think a lot of people feel instinctively there's something a bit odd, like how does making pensioners in Britain freeze to death in winter, which is already happening, how does that solve the climate problem exactly? I think people have questions and articulated. And the other thing, of course, is the woke element of it is I think a lot of people are tired of this incessant whining and bitching and complaining that doesn't seem to have any constructive end or solution, and it's filled the entire media ecosystem. So anytime you turn on your TV, you're hearing all this stuff, and it's kind of like, okay, well, you keep complaining about these things. What are we going to do, right? And nobody's offering positive solutions, and I think that's another part of it. And the third part of it, and I've said this in media interviews I've done before, is I think we live in a society in which adults are increasingly afraid of children or young people, and it's true everywhere. If you think about a university, the professors are afraid of the students because the students can get them fired or get them cancelled. If you think of a big company, in many companies, the employers are afraid of their employees. The people who run the business are terrified of upsetting a few employees who don't like the direction of the company, which seems to me like kind of a weird situation. I've got a young son who was born 9 months ago. I don't plan to be afraid of him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we do live in a society where, I see it on a very basic level. Like I walk around my local park, and it's all like parents like chasing their kids. Oh, Timmy! Oh, it's very we've sort of abdicated responsibility as adults, and I think when you see somebody stand up and talk to young people and level with them and just be honest and go like, this is what you believe, I'm going to engage with it directly, not going to call you names necessarily, not going to attack you, but I am going to challenge you to be better. I think that was also part of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things you said there. So the first thing around people just want to complain about it, and then actually looking at like the numbers around what matters and what doesn't matter. And you mentioned how much the UK in terms of emissions releases like 2%. I mean, even the entire United States, if you look at like the totality of China, and if you lump India into there, I think China alone is more than the Western countries combined in terms of their emissions. and they're adding coal, like a new coal-fired power plant per week, and they have been for years. So it's just going up and up. And so it's like, okay, well, this is the situation. What's happening? Like, how do we fix this? What are the actual solutions that we can
Mm,
push forward? Oftentimes, what I see being in the energy side is that what's getting pushed forward is not going to make a difference at all. Yet it can actually make a huge difference on our economies, people's quality of life here, things like that. The second thing you talked about, which I think was good, is this kind of wokeism, or really, I think just the climate movement has like a base layer of just kind of collectivism in general, right? It's like,
mm.
well, who cares if like there's poor people and their bills are going up, or this is hurting our country's energy security, geopolitical concerns? Like, we're going to save the planet. It's going to be this future utopia. So there's definitely an underlying collectivism with it. And then the thing about the youth is really interesting. It kind of leads into the next, and you can respond to any of that if you want to, but kind of the next side of the
Well, let
question
me do
is,
that before you
yeah, go
move on
ahead.
then,
Yeah.
because I think the point that you made about the approach some climate people, climate activists or whatever you want to call them, are taking, it actually I think goes deeper for some of them, Max, than just we're saving the planet. I think fundamentally the reason, whenever you look around and you go, a person is saying something to me that makes absolutely zero sense, right? That they're
Yeah.
saying something that is completely not a reaction to what we're talking about, or is not a solution to what we're talking about. Why is this person reacting that way? And when you get into that conversation, you often find that people have underlying beliefs or have underlying emotions that they're not vocalizing, but are definitely there and are driving the behavior, right? And with some of this climate stuff, I am absolutely convinced that there is a cult like, religious like element to a lot of the ideology. I'm not saying everyone who cares about the planet is, an ideologue and is crazy, but the cult like dimension of it, I think, goes something like this: we Western people are bad, right? We colonized, we did slavery, we did, we did the Industrial Revolution, we did all the polluting. And by the way, A, those things are true. B, it's also what everyone else did and would like to do if they possibly could, right? All
Yeah.
of those things,
Right.
including slavery and everything. I talk a lot about this in my book. Now, if you believe that we are uniquely evil, rapacious, colonizing, enslaving, planet raping people, then in every religion, for every sin, there must be atonement. There must be some kind of punishment and apology. And I think to a lot of these people, the idea of poor people freezing to death or the countries becoming poor, they don't care about it because they see that as a price for our sins. And that's why I fundamentally believe that the ideology behind some of this is fundamentally anti-human. These are people who've bought into these completely discredited ideas, people like Paul Ehrlich and the population bomb, who predicted that
Right.
we would have all died 53 times by now, and we haven't. Um, and so I think part of it is these people fundamentally believe that we are bad and we must be punished. And if we are made poorer by the decisions that they are taking, that's not only not a bad thing, actually, that is how we atone for our many crimes. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, oh, the religious undertones are for sure there, and I think that there's this element of like, if you look at, I had this guy the other day. I say the other day, last year on social media, who's a big Twitter follower account, and he was like saying basically the ship has sailed. Everybody wants this, like deal with it. And he was talking primarily to the oil and gas industry, which is where I work in, and I do other stuff, but I work mainly in natural gas. And he was just like, it's over, right? Like everybody wants this, and I'm like, do they? Like the people in the streets of Mumbai, to the people in Africa that don't have basic, power or electricity at all. Really, it's like you've got, like you were saying, these people that are standing not just at like the top of Maslow's pyramid, but kind of like tippy toed at the top, like
Mm,
looking up even higher, trying to solve like these existential things. So it has very much religious undertones. And when they say things like denier, right, it's like these
mm,
slurs like, oh, you're a climate denier or a science denier. And to me, it's like, that feels a very, that's like a religious argument. Like, you don't say that in science. I mean, science is supposed to be questioning, like questioning all this stuff a lot, right? Yet it feels like there's very much a tone of like, you're not allowed to question it. You're a
mm.
denier. You don't believe it.
Well, and irrespective of whether you think it is happening or not happening, or is caused by humans or isn't caused by humans, or is massively impactful, impacted by human behavior or isn't, that still doesn't explain why you're offering solutions that aren't going to work, right? Even if you accept, even if you
Right.
accept that climate change is a big problem, the way that they're going about it is never going to fix it, because as long as we live in a democracy, when people work out that this is making them poorer, they're going to vote for people who don't do that, which is how you're
Right.
going to get Bolsonaros and whoever else is elected all around the world if you carry on down this path. And so
Yeah.
the only way that you can get to this position is if you have either dictatorships everywhere or global government. And I think that's something that nobody wants. So why don't we talk about actually how to fix this problem if you think it's serious? But the other point I'd make, Max, is, as I said, I'm not a scientist, but I actually come from a family of scientists. And I've been thinking about this a lot. So my understanding of science is, like, if you think about electricity, right? Most people believe that electricity is a thing and it works, not because they went
Right.
to school and they had the theory of how the electricity works explained to them, because most people couldn't. If you transported me back into the Middle Ages in a time machine and said, explain to these people how to come up with
Yeah.
street
Right.
lighting and electricity, I couldn't do it. I don't know, you maybe could. Most people
No.
could not do it, right? And so we sort of take the existence of electricity, it's not on faith, but it's actually on experience, right? Every time you hit the light switch, it works. And when it doesn't work, you get an electrician, he comes in and he fixes it. And you go, okay, I understand that theory plus experience is telling me this is real. But if you think about that as science, and then you compare that to what we're talking about here, what are we talking about? We're talking about forward projections about the
Right.
future, which may or may not be accurate, which have a hugely wide spectrum of what it is. Even the IPCC report doesn't predict a climate catastrophe like the sort of thing that these people are screaming,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
you're not actually being asked to accept science in the way that we conventionally understand science. What you're being asked to accept is the predictions of some scientists about what their models say about one of the most infinitely complicated things to predict, which is something as complicated as planetary climate, right? Now, that isn't really the same thing. So when they're saying, and I don't take a position on whether climate change is happening or not, is made by humans or not. I'm just saying, when they say that you're a science denier, it's a deliberate conflation of very, very different things. There's a difference between saying, gravity isn't real and climate change is a thing
Yeah.
that we can
Right.
have a conversation about. And that is deliberately smuggling this concept in order to be able to not have the actual discussion.
Well, I agree with all of that. I don't try to stay out of the realm as well around whether this is, the total impact in terms of what's human and what's not. I've read all the reports. I've interviewed a bunch of climate scientists. I say a couple climate scientists on the show, and I've heard their perspectives. There's aspects of it that are absolutely compelling. There's other stuff that seems a little bit nebulous and could be subject to human influence on it. But to your point, even around gravity, I mean, like there's still stuff that we don't understand within quantum physics and things like that. We look at it and we're like, gravity, the formula, the theory doesn't actually work for this. So science is kind of always evolving. There's always new information that's coming in. And the times when I've been called a denier aren't even when I'm like denying anything about climate change, is when I'm just making even an argument about the solutions.
Hmm.
People will call me a denier in terms of just giving like practical solutions on what we could do. What do you think about just the hypocrisy of like all the young people, back to the young people part, where they can get the virtue of, for example, hating fossil fuels or wanting to make this difference on climate, yet not doing anything really to do that, right? It's like Greta has a coat made out of hydrocarbons. Her new book, she's got all these things that she uses that are clearly made from fossil fuels. She uses them all the time. These people are flying around on private jets to go to these conferences to talk about climate change. Young people in particular, you said this is a huge issue for them, and I think it is, yet none of them are doing anything that would actually make a difference. So how do you think we got to this phenomenon where people can get the virtue of something, but then actually not have to do anything when it comes to making it better?
Well, yeah, I think there probably are some young people who are trying to make an actual difference and getting involved in science and research and technology, but we live in an attention economy, and so the things that will grab at people's attention is, doom, gloom, the world's about to end, and blah blah blah. And also, as we discussed a little bit earlier, I think a lot of people in the West have been persuaded that what we should be feeling about ourselves is a fundamental sense of guilt. And if you have
Mm.
that sense of guilt, someone coming along and telling you that, here is a thing through which you can atone and make yourself feel better, that will also grab people's attention. So, and also, look, you and I were both young once. I think you're probably a little younger than me, but we were both young once. And we were just as stupid and just as arrogant and thought we could fix all the problems of the world, most likely. I
That's
certainly
fair.
was, as
Yeah.
well. So that's why I think the speech did as well as it did, because rather than saying, what I probably would have said myself 5 years ago, and what many of us would have said, because these people are annoying. Woke people are incredibly annoying, right? Just annoying, right? And we get annoyed and we go, these people are annoying, let's mock them. And I totally get that. But I think the speech did well because I actually wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying you guys are all a bunch of idiots. I was saying you guys have an opportunity. You can make a difference to things that you care about, to things that you believe in. But that means you have to work, you have to build, you have to create things. And the reason I was saying that, Max, is, I mean, it is a little bit of a trick, because I know for a fact that once you start building something, once you start creating things, once you get involved in actual research or actual technological development, that teaches you that the world is infinitely more complicated than you thought. And then this idea of simple solution to complex problems starts to
Hmm.
dissipate, because you're going, holy shit, I can't even get, I can't even, like, Melissa Chen, who's a good friend of mine, she tweeted something a long time ago, and she said, you cannot remain woke while building anything, whether that's a business, whether that's muscle, whether that's a career, because the reality of what that's like teaches you the very opposite of what wokeness is. Like, if you want to go to the gym and get big, right, the fact is you have to put in the work, you have to eat right, you have to be disciplined, you have to show up even when you don't want to show up. Like, sitting on your phone and tweeting about it isn't going to give you the muscles that you want. The same with a business, the same with anything. And so I'm actually sort of encouraging young people to get into working on whatever it is they think needs fixing, because in the process of that, they're going to get a much more nuanced and sophisticated understanding of the world.
I think the aspect you talked about building and creating is just so true. When you actually have to be in the arena and doing something for yourself and figuring it out, you realize that so much is nuanced. And there's very little that's a simple answer to a complex problem. And I think in the energy debate, that's one of the biggest issues we face is this headline culture where it's basically like, we're just going to plug in a solar panel and everything's going to, the lights will all come on, and everything's going
Mm.
to work. And these systems are complex. Like you said, I mean, people don't know. Look at energy stuff all the time, and I still couldn't give you every single step in how the electricity hits the light bulb in this studio. So people just want to go to work every day. They want to do their job, right? They don't have time to understand the nuances of everything. But I think, if to your point, if you are building, if you are pursuing something, if you are putting in the work, I completely agree. Like, it forces you to react to those realities. What about the reality in Europe right now? And I guess it's gotten a little better with energy prices, but just people's response to everything that's happened in terms of like the price of whether it be energy prices or inflation or all these things. Does that even matter? I mean, I've asked talked to some other people that are in the UK, and their response was interesting to me. I want to hear yours, but is it changing people's perspective at all? It's like, look, these bad policy decisions are now leading to a place where we're less energy secure. We've got all these issues. The price of everything is going up.
Mm. I think that it has probably made the people who already thought that way slightly more vocal, and it's
Mm.
given them like a, here, this is what I was talking about, kind of opportunity. But I think in terms of the public consciousness, I don't think we're there at all. And certainly in the political conversation, I mean, I was on, uh, after my speech, I was on a program called Question Time, which is the biggest public political discussion show we have on TV in the UK. So it's massive. And there were there was a left wing and a right wing politician who were just both completely on board with net zero. And when I mentioned that maybe this is something that we should look at, they looked at me like I was insane. So I think that in the mainstream conversation, That adjustment hasn't quite been made, and that's partly because every time energy prices go up, the government goes, okay, we'll just print some more money and give it to you to make you feel better about it, right?
Mhm.
Now there are people like me who think that that's not sustainable. I'm crazy like that. I don't think printing endless amounts of money to make people feel better about the fact that you've raised the electricity and energy prices is going to work over a longer period of time. But we'll wait and see. I think right now we got lucky because obviously it's been a very warm winter. The price
Yeah.
of energy didn't go up as much as people thought, and then the government came in and basically bailed everybody out.
Yeah, the gaslighting around the energy stuff is super disturbing. I mean, I know the nuances of the market and look at it a lot. And then I get into like an Uber in New York City a few months ago. And the guy's like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm in Oklahoma. I work in oil and gas." And he's like, "What's with all like the, corporate greed, the price gouging and everything that's going on?" And I'm like, there's no price gouging. It's literally, it's a world market. But he's just parroting these talking points that the mainstream politicians are saying, and it's just sad. I'm like, I'm not going to sit here and explain the nuances to this Uber driver over a conversation, but clearly they say these things because they work, right? I mean, people believe it.
Well, people always, most people, as you said yourself, and I don't even blame them because it's a luxury for people like me to be able to, have time to think about this stuff. But most
Yeah,
people have, a job, a partner, kids, all sorts of problems. They've got parents who are getting elderly or whatever, depending on what stage of your life at. You've got young kids, or you've got elderly parents, or you've got health issues, or you've got financial problems, or whatever it is. And people don't have the time to delve deeply into these issues, and along comes a politician and goes, guys, there's no real world problems. There's no actual challenges that we have to work on as a human species. No, 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 no. It's that guy over there. He's the asshole that's making your life, that's ruining your life.
yeah,
And what a great narrative that is. And by the way, that is a narrative that leaders who've wanted power have used throughout history, always.
yeah,
Whether, and I'm not going to give the obvious comparisons because then people go, you're comparing it. It's just like this is what people always do. They go, let's not think about the real problem. Let's point our finger and go, that's the bad guy over there. And that's so much easier. And it's also very fulfilling because it means that there's a solution. If we just got that bad guy to stop being a bad guy, if we kill him or if we get rid of him, problem solved. And isn't that a
yeah.
wonderful message of optimism and opportunity that people can latch onto and feel like, oh, okay, there's somebody at fault. We can deal with them, and everything's going to be fine. Well, guess what? The world's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think that's why these conversations are so important, and then have them out there evergreen for people to listen to if they're interested and want to hear a nuance based discussion talking about like self censorship and free speech and how that ties in with all the ESG stuff. Because I mean, in my industry, it's gotten so political with ESG. I think a lot of people are very nervous, even within the energy industry, to even have conversations about. For example, most people wouldn't even touch climate or even talk about it. Most people wouldn't even talk about any of the ESG stuff. And there's a lot of self censorship going on. I think I did a poll on Twitter, and it was like, do you self censor? And 60 something percent of people were like, yes, in the poll. And then the people that said they don't were mostly the people that said, if you're a non, yes, or if you're not anonymous, no. And it was like only the people that were anonymous basically said they don't self censor. And there was a very
Mm-hmm.
small percentage. And that's basically how I felt. I watched that episode you did with Pomp on his podcast. I don't know if you saw the YouTube version that he like took a piece of it out, like censored
I,
it. Did
I
you
I
see
don't
that?
know which piece that he took out, but I did see some people complaining about it. But I actually don't
He
remember.
basically, it was ridiculous. It was just the part where and I'm going to put this on YouTube, and I mean, you basically were just like talking about COVID, and you're like, yeah, mostly like the people that got sick were mostly elderly and people with underlying health problems or obese people. You were like, if you were young and healthy, your statistical chance was very low. And just basically a simple fact that
Yeah.
is completely true, that the science knows is true, that the data says is true. And he was like scared. I mean, it honestly kind of gave me chills. And because he took it out, and then he left it in on Spotify. But just this phenomenon of self censorship, I'm kind of ranting, but I've heard you talk about it a lot. I think I think it's a huge problem.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize that's what he took out, and I have no issue with him doing it because I understand the pressures. We have a YouTube channel, Triggernometry, and we've got strikes for talking about this issue. Most of them got taken away again, but I understand people's hesitation, and that, Max, isn't self censorship. That is censorship. Because the reason he did that isn't that he was like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't say this because people won't
Right.
like it. He did that because he knows that YouTube may punish him for it, right? And
Sure.
so that's part of it. And another part of it, again, I give these stats in my book. I think statistically, um, in America, over 50% of Democrats, over 60% of independents, and nearly 80% of Republicans um, self-censor themselves when speaking in public or speaking to friends and family about political issues, because that's the sort of culture that we now operate in. We operate in a culture where um, I did some. I can't even remember what happened. I posted some kind of joke on my Twitter the other day about aliens, and a woman responded saying, "Well, I hope these aliens don't have weird pronouns," and I said something about how, well, if they do, they can go back to where they came from, like a joke about sort of like sending aliens back to where
Right.
they came from because they've got weird pronouns. And then someone quote tweeted it who didn't like it. And then a bunch of people came in and started attacking me, which I'm used to and I don't give a shit. But this woman who was responding to me, and we were having a perfectly nice, jokey conversation. It wasn't meant seriously, it wasn't meant to harm
Yeah.
anyone. She ended up deleting her account.
Wow.
Right. And so this is what happens to you if you say something that other people don't like. It's therefore not a surprise that people are concerned about it. My attitude to that is to double down and go, no, F you, I'm going to say what I think. And I think the more of us do that, the less it will become a problem over time. But it takes people stepping up and being willing to have the conversation.
I think and I'm in this boat to some degree, being an entrepreneur and on my own. You have the ability now. I heard you talk about it on something where you said, look, you've kind of forged your own path, and you have the ability now to say what you want to say,
Mm.
and put yourself out there, and have this platform, and that's huge. I think that, to your point, a lot of people are just so worried about all these things in their life, whether it be like mainly people losing their job is the thing that they're worried about. And it's crazy that you can, say something that even Pomp, I mean, like, to your point, it's like, that's his livelihood. He's doing
Mm.
this show for his livelihood. And he's like, just for saying something that's factually true could lose his livelihood. In a way, right? If they took it off YouTube, if his channel got struck, you see my
Yeah.
point. So it's
Yeah,
just,
totally. I would say this
it's
though, Max, like I I started out as a comedian on the comedy circuit talking, just joking about stuff and whatever. And at that time, I already was putting myself in harm's way,
sure.
metaphorically speaking, because I was saying most of the shit that I'm saying now back then. And I was getting, people pulling my gigs and not booking me for things, etc., even back then. But I just thought it was more important than that. So I wouldn't want to create the idea in people's minds that the only way you can say what you think is once you already have a platform, which means you can't be cancelled. I think the courage that you need to speak up at the beginning is it's like a muscle. You train yourself and you go, okay, well, I said this and then I didn't get killed. Okay, maybe I'll say this other thing that I think is important. Let's see if I get killed now. And you kind of work your way up over time. I think that's kind of what you got to do. But a few people on YouTube speaking their mind is not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough. People have to challenge a lot of this craziness in their workplace. Doesn't mean you have to do it confrontationally or angrily or unconstructively, but people need to speak up. And the reason I feel so strongly about it is, I'm from the Soviet Union. My family grew up there, and we've seen all this shit before. When people refuse, when people go along with things they know to be wrong, bad things happen. Always, every single time, bad things happen. And so for me, it's just a matter of principle and also just honoring people, millions of people who suffered a fate that was way worse than any modern consolation that you could possibly imagine in those Soviet terrible times. I really feel like I owe it to them to speak the truth, and I think if more people have that attitude, we're going to get a lot further, a lot faster.
No, I completely agree. And it's hard. It's, you need the people that are willing to do it. And I've taken a lot of inspiration from people in this space, like that do their own media, or people that are comedians that put themselves out there. I've got friends that have podcasts and that have really made a brand and just basically not back down and said that, I'm going to say the things I think are right. And it's helped me because, man, like when I started, I was like, when the podcast is about 2 years old now, and or a little over 2 years, and it was mostly like just kind of industry stuff. I was like, I'm going to talk about the energy industry. I want to do a podcast. I've now kind of just moved into talking about whatever I want because of the
Mm,
longevity of it. Like you can't do it forever if you just, so I just kind of rebranded it, and it was like, look, it's just me having on whoever I want to talk to.
mm,
And I was scared at the beginning, to even like touch on some of these issues. And it was like, I got to keep it all professional. And then you just get to the point where you're like, or I can just say the things that I think are true and that I have conviction in and believe in, and it is what it is. And I do have the luxury of not working for a big company, so that I don't have to worry about that. And most
mhm.
of the people that we work for and do stuff for, they like their views pretty much align, I think, or a lot of theirs do. I mean, you
Yeah.
always risk offending someone. But the question I have for this is like, I was a product of it, born in the 80s, late 80s, grew up in the 90s, and went to college in the early 2000s. Like, I don't remember things being like this, just kind of the origin or the evolution in this recent history, because it didn't feel like this when I grew up or
It
even
did
when I was
not.
in college.
It did not.
Not
No,
even that long ago.
it wasn't like this at all. In fact, yeah, and comedy is an interesting example of this because when I started comedy in about 2014, it was actually the opposite of what it is now. Like certainly in the UK, every comedian was doing the most offensive material that they could possibly think of. And that
Okay.
was like you had to like if you did not have a rape joke, you like what were you doing? Like and it was almost like too much. I was not a
Yeah, no,
fan
I mean,
of that.
I'm laughing because that's ridiculous
Right,
that that
but
would be a thing.
that's how it was, right? So, some adjustment was probably a good thing, and the fact that we are a little bit more sensible and sensitive about things like that is a good thing. But I think it really shifted with A, social media, and B, 2016. Um,
Hmm,
because one of the things I've observed about what social media has done to politics in particular is like in the UK, we have this great political tradition, which is called Prime Minister's Questions. The Prime Minister, which is the leader of the UK, has to come to Parliament every Wednesday at 12 o'clock and take questions from both his own party and the opposition parties that are there. And it's a kind of Punch and Judy debating style setting. So it's very ritualized, and the people on his side roar whenever he's done a great, made a great point, and the
right,
people on the opposite side, shake their heads and boo and whatever. It's a kind of ritualized debating chamber, um, and in the past, what it was always like was, generally speaking, it was quite combative and good natured at the same time. There was a certain set of rules. You didn't get personal. You didn't imply that the other party wanted to kill poor people because they'd come up with a policy that that affected people on the lower end of the income scale.
right,
You argued that it was wrong, and you'd make a joke and you'd call them out and whatever, but you didn't act as if they were literally the most evil thing you could imagine. And then when social media comes in, it's amazing to go back and watch stuff from back then because it's incomparable. You just can't compare because nowadays none of them are actually talking to the people in the room. They're all playing to their own Twitter following. And that
right,
means that the way they phrase and present and talk about these things is so hostile and so confrontational and so extraordinarily ungracious and unkind and completely lacking in any sort of humanity, which is fascinating because as someone who does TV and radio, I often meet politicians, and behind the scenes, they're actually not like that. They actually don't think that the other party is, for the most part, is killing the poor on purpose or whatever. But they will say it because they know that it gets clicks. And I think social media, and then of course, Brexit and Trump were big, big culture war kind of explosions that I think triggered a lot of this combined with social media.
man. The social media point is really good. It seems obvious when you're talking about it, but had not really thought about it in that way. I guess
Mm,
it's. I mean, I've seen it too. It's like you become a caricature of yourself in a lot of ways on these platforms,
that's
and that's
right.
the part that I haven't enjoyed. It's like I didn't have any social media 2 years ago, and then have now tried to grow this following. And you find that like you're getting rewarded for the stuff that's like, the hyperbolic or the outrage stuff. And then you're bringing that in. And then it's like you try to do something that I told my wife the other day, she's always like, how's your Twitter thing going? I'm like, it's going all right. Like, I was like, I haven't really been tweeting lately because the stuff that I want to tweet about won't get engagement. But then you come up with some tweet that's like either you think it's funny or it's an outrage thing and it gets a ton of engagement. You're like, okay, I see. And
I
so then
see how
you
this
like,
works. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you're like, I see how this works. Right. And so, I've gotten jaded with that, but it's interesting to say that, that's been what's driving some of this stuff. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, everybody's just in this hyper stimulus environment saying all these crazy things to get engagement.
Hmm.
Like that. I don't know. Anyways,
Well, you have to get
it's
through.
wild.
The way I found is, I think initially I was definitely operating more in that way because that's what it literally the rewires your brain. If you're
Right.
somebody like me whose entire livelihood depends on having an audience of people who are interested in what I have to say, then you just think of it from forget the right and wrongs of it and just think about it from an incentive point of view because people mostly will respond to incentives. What are the incentives? The incentives are to grow your audience. Well, what's the best way to grow your audience? Is to make fun of and attack people that your audience already doesn't like. And what I've
Yeah.
found is the bigger my accounts on social media get, the less I'm tempted to do that. And so it's
Yeah.
ironic because the bigger my Twitter gets, the less I tweet because I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't want to say that. I don't want to be destructive. I want to be constructive. And then, it means that there's fewer things for you to say. And I've kind of made my peace with that. And you have to accept that you may not grow as quickly, but you're putting healthy stuff out there.
Yeah. I agree. I feel the same way.
Plus, you've
It's
always got the
exactly
option
it.
to take one of my speeches and just put it out. That goes viral.
Yeah,
You get a bunch
dude.
of new followers.
Yes. No, it's been that's the best thing is like when stuff goes viral. And that's the part that I can't ever figure out too. I mean, yours was obvious. Like I saw that thing and I think I just was like saw it when it had a couple hundred likes and I was like, man, that was awesome. And I tweeted something so simple. I was like, if you're gonna watch anything today, like watch this or something
Mhm.
like that. And it just went crazy. And I'm
Yeah.
glad it did.
Lots of people did that.
Uh,
We put it out on our YouTube channel. It got to 5 million views within a couple of weeks. We
right.
put it out on my Instagram and other socials as well. It's probably done about 100 to 200 million views if you look at different people who've posted it on different platforms.
I mean, it has to have. It got like millions on Twitter and
Yeah.
2 million something on TikTok. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Moving on to where this leads, and I've heard you talk about this before, and I also think that this is an interesting point to tie into the war in Ukraine and things that are
Mm.
going on around just the East and the West, and your thoughts on where this unmitigated, if this train just keeps speeding up and up on the woke side, where that can go, and then I'll ask some questions after you respond to that.
Well, I've been saying for many years, and actually, it's in the speech that I gave that if we continue to undermine our values and our confidence in our values, and the very idea that there are such things as Western values or British values, like if you go up to a British person on the street with a microphone and go, "Can you define British values?" They'd look at you like you're trying to like make them look bad. You're trying to get them to say something racist or whatever. That's how a lot of people now think about these things because the very idea of us having values is like exclusionary or whatever nonsense
Right.
they've come up with. And I mean, I do look around in history. How many cultures do you know who decided that they had no value and in fact that they're guilty and must be punished and survived? How,
Right.
so we are making ourselves vulnerable. And the thing that people in the West really don't understand is people in the rest of the world, they are not sitting around doing the same thing. They're thinking about how do we expand, how do we grow, how do we get more money, how do we build a bigger military, how do we have more power, how do we get more influence in the world, how do we secure more of the world's natural resources, how do we acquire more land, how do we take control of other territories that we don't physically control, but how do we, like, that's what they're thinking about. The Chinese and the Russian governments aren't thinking about how to make the most diverse army in the history of Russia or the most history of China.
Yeah.
They're thinking about, well, in the Russian case at the moment, they're thinking about why have we got such a shit army and is it doing so badly?
Yeah.
But the ambitions are to be powerful and to be competitive internationally. And if all we want is to navel gaze and look inward, we make ourselves vulnerable, man. It's really very simple.
No, it is. And I think that people underestimate the intentions of these countries, and it's like that absolutely is the goal. It's what's been crazy to me is to see the people in the Ukraine war and how that's been accepted from people from different sides of the aisle. And you've got some people that are very much of a we shouldn't be over there, we shouldn't be helping, and then you've got people that are very much supporting, saying we should be. And in a weird way, it's kind of like in some ways like the opposite. There's a lot of these people that you would view as like pacifists that would never want to, be in a war or fight. They're like, we have the Ukraine flag in their bio. And then the people that you would say maybe on the right, that would historically be painted as someone who's more aggressive on these things is like, we shouldn't be over there. Just the politics around this conflict, in your opinion, driving some of these narratives between the different parties. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think you're talking mainly about the online left and the online right there, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
look, there are the so-called anti-war left, right? They've always done what they're doing at the moment, which is they side with our
Hmm.
enemies. That's what they do. That's their raison d'etre. Like we had one of these guys on our show before the war in Ukraine, a guy called Aaron Mate, and he said America is the Death Star. That's how these people think about the West. They think that we are the
Yeah.
most evil, oppressive people. And look, they have some evidence on their side. I was against the war in Iraq. I was against the invasion of Afghanistan. I'm against the interventions in Syria and Libya. I think those were all bad things that the West did. And I wish we hadn't done them. But the reason I wish we hadn't done them is the very same reason I oppose Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is I don't think big, powerful empires like the United States and like Russia should go around invading or attacking other countries because they feel like it or because they think that's what is needed. But the anti-war left, they don't see it like that because to them, we're always bad and anyone who's doing anything against us is good. That's how they think. And this online anti-woke right who are basically siding with Putin, they I think have got to a position where I don't know if you've ever seen. This is another thing you should tweet that would go super viral, although it's a couple of years old now. But during the pandemic, if you remember, there were a lot of people who were hesitant about taking the vaccine. And
Right.
the mainstream media tried to demonize these people and say that they're all evil and they're all anti-vaxxers and whatever. And I was somebody who wasn't an anti-vaxxer or anything like that, but I also had some clue as to why those people felt the way they did. And I did an article in a Twitter thread, which we also put out as a video on my channel, which is called "Why People Are Vaccine Hesitant." And I talked about basically how the media has lied to people for now 7 or 8 years nonstop in a way that we could all tell was going on. And so when the media is
Right.
coming along and telling you, you must take the vaccine or you must support Ukraine, a lot of people's natural instinct at this point is basically to oppose whatever the mainstream is saying. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing a lot on the right, is this, like I call it teenage oppositional defiance disorder. Like you're saying we should go this way. No, 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 we must go the opposite way. And by the way, the great irony for me as someone who's from Russia, has family in Ukraine, and I know these two countries well, is I know for a fact that if Donald Trump had been reelected in 2020 and he was still in the White House and he was advocating support for Ukraine to push back against the evil Russian dictator, quote unquote, all of these anti-woke people on the right would be massively supportive and they'd be like, give Ukraine nukes or whatever, because it would be their guy that's doing it. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of, and I talk to these people all the time. They do not have the first idea about what's going on in Ukraine. They literally do not know anything. And the moment you probe them, they do not know basic facts about the war. They don't know basic facts about Russian and Ukrainian history. They know nothing. But their opinion isn't based on that. Their opinion is based on opposing whatever it is that they don't like.
Yeah, that's really good. I do think if like who's in the presidential office has a sway over which people's opinions are going to go on these things. I try not to get into this debate in terms of like whether we should be over there or not. I mean, I have my opinions personally. I try to stay away from like stuff that I'm not a geopolitical expert.
Hmm.
I mean, I can talk about some of my thoughts and feelings about it, but like it's complicated. One thing that I've gotten older, because when I was younger, I mean, I probably would have been called a liberal back then. I don't know now. I don't think my views have really changed, and I wouldn't be called that anymore. But I definitely was against the wars we were in, the wars you mentioned earlier. Didn't like what the administration was doing overseas. As I've gotten older, I kind of view these things now more through a pragmatic lens. And I'm also like a student of history. I love history, reading
Mm,
history books, and like it doesn't seem like there's ever been a time where the most powerful country, the most powerful empire, which by the way, in those places largely were peaceful, and it was like the peacekeepers across their, domain. It wasn't, there's really never an example of when they weren't just like in this perpetual war state. And that's almost like that predicates the peace and the prosperity and the Western, or not even just Western values, but the values that you can build and you can have knowledge and educational systems. But in the background is always this war machine kind of behind all those empires. And so as I've gotten older and learned that, I kind of just view this stuff through. It's like we almost have to be in these conflicts in some ways, even though I hate that answer.
mm.
But it's just like if we're not doing it, then Russia's, to your point, it's like, well, then Putin's just going to do it. China's going to do it. Just your thoughts on that in general. And like,
Yeah, well, this is where I think the nuance comes in, because I don't believe that it was in America's or in the West strategic interest to invade Afghanistan.
sure.
I don't see that we've gained from that. I don't think it was in America's or in the West strategic interest to invade Iraq. I don't see how we've gained from that. Libya and Syria, etc. Right? I don't see these were uh, invasions that happened for reasons that to this day I don't think we fully understand. But I think if you look objectively, I don't believe that they were worth it. Right? And this is why nuance is important, because the war in Ukraine is the exact opposite of that. Right. First of all, America isn't invading Ukraine. America isn't invading Russia. America isn't doing any of the things that it did in Syria or Libya or in Iraq or in Afghanistan. What this is about is the exact opposite. Russia is doing in Ukraine what America did in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? And in my view, it is in the West strategic interest. Like you said, the world is a competition. And this has always been like it, particularly in the world that is interconnected globally. The different empires of the world, the great civilizations of the world, they are in constant competition with each other for resources, for control, for power, for land, for oil, for gas, for gold, for all of these things. And just because we sit sipping frappuccinos in a nice Starbucks in the center of New
Yeah.
York or London doesn't mean that's over. Doesn't mean that people in China and Russia don't want more than they have. They do. They do, and their leaders do, and their leaders' popularity and their leaders' success to some extent depends on their ability to project their power internationally. And so, like you say, if you read any history, you understand that when we talk about these things, it's people go, "How could Putin possibly invade Ukraine?" It's like, how did what you thought that World War II happened and that was it? We're not going to have any more major conflicts ever again.
Yeah.
How dumb are
Right.
you? This is the natural order of things. And since the collapse of the Soviet Union, people go, if NATO hadn't expanded eastwards, this would never have happened. And they're right. It never would have happened, because all of those territories would now be under the control of Russia one way or another. They
Yeah.
would. That's why they joined. That's why Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland were desperate to join NATO the moment the Soviet Union collapsed, because they were like, if we don't do this, we're going to end up under the Russian thumb again, and we don't want that.
For sure. It is nuanced. And I think those other wars you mentioned in the Middle East and the stuff, I think in retrospect, it's really easy to be like, and at the time, maybe people didn't draw the lines. But if I had to guess, I think that the US, I don't know, I don't want to get conspiratorial. Those are complicated topics, but I think a lot of it did have to do with resources and control of that geographic area and looking at, if we weren't over there, would Russia come in? Would China come in? If I had to guess, now there's probably a lot of other reasons it's such a complex topic, but
Mm,
then we had the shale revolution. We became energy independent. A lot's changed in the last 15 years to where like maybe that oil isn't, now we're the largest oil producer in the world. We didn't use, we'd fallen off for a long time,
mm.
and that's where the majority of the oil was coming from. So anyways, we don't have to go into that because it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
pretty
I,
complex,
I I
unless you want
would
to
argue
respond to it,
though.
you can, but
Well, all I would say is I think in those sorts of situations, diplomacy is likely to be a much more cost-effective option. War is
agreed.
incredibly expensive,
Well,
incredibly expensive.
nowhere in history do you just like go in where, I mean, if you look back again at these empires that have had conquest, you don't just go in, fight for a long time, and just leave it back to where it was, and it just goes into chaos like we did in some of these places. Like that
Right.
certainly doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
They did a lot of bad things that
And the
don't
invasion
make
of
sense there.
Afghanistan wasn't even about. I mean, what resources? What, some rocks, some caves?
Yeah,
You
right,
know, like what? Some,
right.
okay, heroin. Great. Is that what you guys went in for? I don't think
I
so.
mean, there's
That was
yeah,
much more like, 9/11. Obviously, a horrific
right.
incident, and people felt like they needed to go and kick the cat. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And look, and
absolutely.
the argument was, okay, we'll deal with terrorism there. Uh, we still had some
Yeah,
terrorism after that, from what I remember, for quite a long
right.
time.
Yeah, it was not a good deal. Afghanistan's not a good
Yeah.
deal. So moving on, I know that like I don't want to get into like your thoughts on Bitcoin, but I heard you talk on Pomp, said you thought it was a scam. I didn't. I've been in the Bitcoin space. Our company does some mining, some Bitcoin mining, because we have energy resources. We help people sell their product, and there was stranded or disadvantaged energy. And we found out that you could mine Bitcoin with this, which made me go, which I didn't know very much, if anything, about it about 2 years ago. And then I kind of went down this whole rabbit hole of trying to figure it out, because I was like, well, wait a second, people are doing this like in my industry. Like, what does this mean? Is it real? And so I've spent a couple years really focusing on it. And I like the technology. I think it can do a lot of cool things. But I, I guess the question would be around uh, the global issues we have around the banking system. I think the World Bank, says that there's like 1.5 billion people that don't have access to even a basic checking account, have zero way to store their wealth, no access to money, no access to banking. And then there's another couple billion people that live in these like totalitarian controlled countries. Like if you're in China, like that's not your money. Like if the government says you say the wrong thing, or your digital passport, gets shut off, you don't have access to your money. And it's like that in a lot of countries, even countries you wouldn't think of in
Like
South
Canada.
America and some of these other, yeah, like Canada. That's where I was going to go at the end of this, was like the trucker protests. Like you say
Mm,
the wrong thing on social media,
mm,
they're shutting your stuff off.
mm,
Um, I think that access to money and access to having a way to store your wealth and because all money is really is your time. It's your life's work. It's
mm.
the effort and everything you've done. You've put it into something to try to store that value and to be able to transact. I don't want to go into the Bitcoin rabbit hole on it, but just your thoughts on these issues, any other solutions outside of something like a Bitcoin, and what you think about when you think about this world where we could be in like central bank digital currencies and all these things that could happen
No,
that
man,
tie
it's
into all these
what I
other
said to
themes.
Pomp. I prefaced by saying repeatedly, this is not an area of expertise. It's not something I know a lot about. I am, and by the way, people often get confused. Like, something could be a scam. That doesn't mean that
Sure.
lots of people can't make money from it. Right?
Yeah.
So you could make money from fueling the mining of Bitcoin. You could make money from trading Bitcoin. You could make money from creating a platform for the trading of Bitcoin. You could make money from marketing Bitcoin. You could make money from all sorts of aspects to do with the thing. But all I'm saying, and I'm not an expert, and I say it 5 times again, it's not an area of expertise. But if I'm asked about it, my instinctive sense, and it could be completely wrong, but my instinctive sense is the way that the technology, which has uses, as you say, I'm less sold on the idea that those uses are how you fix the problem of 1.5 billion people not having access to banking. Because I go to parts of the world regularly where people don't have access to banking. And the answer to those people and banking isn't Bitcoin, it's the economic development. If you have economic development, then you have access to banking. That tends to be what happens, right? But and also, how good is the store of value if it fluctuates massively in price? Like, that's not really what people think of when they think about storing value in something. I lived in 1990s Russia, and the moment people got money in rubles, they converted it into dollars. Why? Because the dollar was a stable currency and the ruble wasn't. It's not like, the ruble had no value. It had value, it was just going to fluctuate massively. And so if you have something like Bitcoin where the price of it is not predictable over periods of time, I don't know how good a store of value it is. Again, I'm a layman. I don't know. I don't have any expertise on it. But the main thing I'm reacting to is every time I open my Twitter, I see some girl in a low cut top going, "Hey guys, buy Bitcoin." And I'm like, Jesus, get that thing away from me.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of scammers in the crypto industry broadly. And I don't do anything in crypto. And really, even with Bitcoin, it's mainly just I like the censorship resistant aspect of it. I like the aspect of the network more so much than the token. So the token, like your point, is going to fluctuate up and down. There's some cool properties to it that there's not
Hmm.
going to be any more of them, that like you can trade it or give it to people and send it back and forth. But the network is really cool because it's like, sorry, I just killed my chair. The network is cool because it's like you can send and receive it to anybody. It's permissionless. It can't be censored. I think that stuff's pretty, that's some
It
power to,
can and it
to
will
change
be.
things.
It can and it will be. It
I,
can and it will
and I
be.
would encourage you to like talk to some people that are, there's some really good people in the space. There's some people that are like pretty toxic in the
Oh
space,
no,
but
we've had
there's
loads
some
of people. We've
good
had
people
Safety
too.
Name on the show to talk about it. Like we've had Bitcoin guys, and I listen to their arguments with great interest. I'm just
Yeah.
saying the idea that the government is not going to get its hands on your money is not historically speaking accurate. If there's technology for you to get your money out of the hands of the government, there will be technology for the government to get its hands back on it. And the idea that the government is going to long term tolerate people, committing financial crimes and trading and whatever they want and not paying taxes on certain money that they have, that's not going to last. Death and
Well,
taxes.
they made gold illegal back in the day, and they confiscated it from everybody, which was the only other thing we have close to this sort of independent store of wealth. I think access to money in banking should be a fundamental human right. But you're to your point. I mean, to me, my thought is the logical conclusion is they're just going to tax the shit out of it, which I think that they already do and
Hmm.
will continue to. And if it's a way for them to tax you, I think they're going to continue to do it. But all right, that's the last on that topic. Last thing here, just building the podcast, building what you've done. Super impressive. I just a lot of respect to you guys. I know we don't have much time left here, but just a little bit on the journey there and thoughts on what success means to you guys into the future.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And I also, I love people like you who start something out and go for it and build it over time. It's really exciting. And I'm always like keen to encourage people like that because we started from absolutely nothing, probably less than nothing, just two comedians, no profile, very kind of a few connections here and there, no money. And for 3 or 4 years, we just put our own money into doing it. It was Trigonometry is now probably on about 1 million listeners and viewers combined. And when we started, we had absolutely nothing, and we worked our asses off. It was a risk because talking about the controversial subjects that we talk about meant that people in our industry, then the comedy industry, were all outraged at us doing this and attacking us and canceling our shows and all sorts of crazy shit, kicking us out of studios, all that sort of thing. We actually have an episode on trigonometry called The Truth About Trigonometry. And part one of that is really talking about the entire journey. But it's been absolutely amazing. And going in it will be 5 years and a couple of months since we started. From that to now we have 10 employees. We talk to some of the greatest minds in the world. We have our own studio that we've built basically from scratch, and we've designed the set the way we want, and we have the green room and like the office part of it. It's awesome, man. And it's the one of the biggest joys for me was becoming a parent 9 months ago. But I also feel like having a leadership role within trigonometry and having people that work for us meant that Jordan Peterson, he had me on the show recently. It hasn't come out yet, but when it does, it's one of the things we talked about I think it's the bonus segment on the Daily Wire. Is he said, well, like running a small business is like fatherhood by proxy because you're looking
Yeah.
after other people. And I felt that way for a long time. And that was something I used to dread. I remember saying to Francis and our executive producer, Anton, I really don't want to hire people because I'm not sure that like I'm wired to like manage them well. And it's forced me to learn a lot of skills and grow and develop as a person. So that journey has been amazing. And the dream for us is the goal for us, and we're going to get there, is to be like the Joe Rogan of Europe. We want to be the number one place in Europe. If you've got something interesting to say, we'll have you on and we'll have that conversation in a long form, honest, respectful way, whether you're left or right or wherever you are on the political spectrum, or if you're not even political. That's the dream. We've had a big boost recently with my Oxford speech, but Francis is putting out great comedy clips, and we've got all sorts of amazing plans for it. So very excited about the future and like super pumped with how things are going.
God, I love that story. I love those stories. Those are the best.
Yeah.
It's just so cool. That's what the name. I just rebranded the podcast to Always Be Building, and it's just kind of this mantra that I've had, and it's really like
Mm.
not about anything specific. People are like, "Is it about building businesses or about building whatever?" And I'm like, "Nah, it's just like kind of the motto that I live by." And stories like yours are like the inspirational ones that you look at and you're just like, anybody can do anything if you just are putting in the effort and the time and you're a good person. And I posted this clip from Francis off of the Rogan episode the other day where he's just talking about the hard work and pushing through and all this
Mm.
stuff. And it's just super inspirational. I know it's the top of the hour. Last thing, congrats on being a dad. I've got 3 little boys. It's the
Oh,
best
awesome,
thing
man.
in
Yeah.
the world. And you're just how you've changed just quickly here on being a
Yeah,
dad
yeah,
and what
no,
that
no,
means to you.
it's been totally transformational. I'm a totally different person now. I feel like I'm much more attached to making the world an actually better place as opposed to complaining about stuff. And I think that's a big shift in my personality lately. And it also puts you in touch with what's really important in life. And so I can have arguments with people online, or people can write lies about me, which they increasingly do now as my profile grows. I come home, I look at my son, and I'm like, who gives a shit? So
Yeah.
it's just given me a lot of perspective on life, and it's awesome. And I'm jealous of you having 3. I need to start catching up on that,
It's
because it's
yeah, it's
awesome.
fun, man.
Yeah,
It's the best. All right,
yeah.
Constantine, thank you so much for doing this. I
Max, really
appreciate it.
appreciate your time. Yeah, and keep tweeting my shit, because you've got a knack of making things go viral. I appreciate it, and all the
I'll
best to you and your podcast. And I hope your audience enjoy this, and you keep growing. And we'll speak again another time.